Today's daf we're going to be learning is Kiddushin, Daf Chet. This week's learning is sponsored by the Hofstadter Dicker family to commemorate the yahrzeit of their great Saba, and Dad, Fred Hofstadter, Ephraim ben Caleb Baruch. We miss you and love you. We're now going to get started. What we had yesterday was a machloket Rabba and Rav Yosef, and there were two ways to understand the machloket. They had a machloket about a man who betroths a woman with silk garments. Does it need evaluation or not? Is the machloket, we said, in a case where it was worth 50 and he said it was worth 50, then does it need evaluation? Because maybe the woman needs to know exactly what it is. And maybe if she doesn't know exactly, maybe she doesn't trust him that that's the exact amount. And therefore, maybe it needs an outside evaluator. But according to the second interpretation, even if he doesn't give any amount and he just says these clothes, even though according to the first reading, we said, obviously that works. It's of course worth more than a pruta, to which they say, even then maybe Rabbi Yosef requires evaluation because it has to be like money. And just like money, we have a set amount. The woman has to know exactly what the value of what she's being betrothed with is. Okay, this, by the way, is interesting. We mentioned in last class that this explains why we have the issue of nowadays we do a ring and we don't know the exact value of the ring. We don't need someone to assess exactly what it's worth, like Rabba's opinion. But I wanted to point out something very interesting. Tosfot on Daf Tet, okay, quotes this Gemara in this long Tosfot. Shirai lo tzarich shuma. Okay, the Gemara in the end paskins. The halacha is that you don't need shuma. It doesn't need evaluation, like Rabba said. And he quotes toward the, let's see where it is. I know I lost my place here. Okay, V'omer Rabbeinu Tam, about halfway through that Tosfot, he says, he says, only really Shiraim doesn't need Shuma. Lefisha Shumatan Yadua Ktsat, because people kind of know what it's valued at. Ve'en Regilim Lit'otbo, and they don't really make mistakes. So even though we hold like Rabba, Rabbeinu Tam modifies that and says, well, really only in silk clothing. But when it comes to fancy stones and pearls, really people don't know the value because people could put fake ones and they could trick people. And therefore, he says something very interesting. Therefore, it's because maybe not. Here comes his big line. You ready for this? And based on this, okay, if you want a good Gemara where it teaches you where the halacha comes from or the custom, we get married these days, right? We do the betrothal under the chuppah. We do the Kiddushin with a ring, and it never has stones on it. It's exactly for this reason, because she won't know what it's evaluated. So as I said yesterday, that here you see, this is why we use rings, but it's even more than that. This is why we use rings without stones in them, because the stones have this issue that perhaps we only hold like Rabba, according to Rabbeinu Tam, in the case of something where its value is known and not objects where people could trick you and use less valued ones or more valued ones, or, and then there would be an issue that maybe she doesn't really know what the worth of the item is. Okay, so that's very fascinating in terms of the custom, why we're very careful that the ring is a simple gold ring, usually a gold band or something very simple that doesn't have any stones on it. Now we're going to get into the top of our daf. Where does Rav Yosef get his opinion from? So Rav Yosef's going to bring two different proofs. Amar Rav Yosef, what's my proof? Detanya, it says in a Braita, Mikesef Miknato. This is talking about a pasuk about an Eved Ivri. Here we have a Jewish slave who has no money, needs to sell himself into slavery, but then he wants to redeem himself. So it says from Kesef Miknato. So what do we learn from this? Bekesef hu nikne. Okay, this is again an Eved Ivri, a Jewish slave who actually is sold into slavery. I think I might have forgotten to say this point, to a Gentile owner. So he can buy himself out if he's right. Let's say the deal was for X number of years. Then he wants to buy himself out. Some people say actually he's supposed to go free in the Yovel year. So he buys himself out based on the years that are left. So what do you see? Because it says kesef, means kesef and not grains or vessels. What exactly is this case of grains or vessels? If it's something that doesn't have value, right? They're bad crops or something, and they don't have any value. They're less than a pruta. Yashiv gulato amar Rachmana lirabot shvei kesef kikesef. If we're going to say it can't be tfuah v'kelim, if they're not worth enough, but if they are worth enough, it can be. Well, you don't need the drasha here to tell you that, because it already says yashiv gulato, which includes that even something that's worth money is treated like money. V'ida lepu shavapruta, my area tfuah v'kelim. And if it doesn't have a shavapruta, so again, if it's de lo maknu klal, we already learned it from somewhere else, right? If it can't be acquired at all. And if, just 1 second. Oh, sorry. Let me say that better. I didn't say it right. Let's go back. Ilema de lo maknu klal, if it's coming to say that you can't, I explained this wrong in the beginning. I have to go back. What is the case of tfuah and kelim that it's trying to exclude? If it's de lo maknu klal, if it means you can never acquire someone with kesef and kelim, that can't possibly be, because you can't buy yourself, the Eved Ivri can't buy himself out of slavery. Because Yashiv Gulato Amar Rachmana, because the pasuk also says he can return, right, the money to redeem himself, meaning with anything. Okay, in other words, those words are really unnecessary. It already said he buys himself back. Why did it have to say Yashiv Gulato? It must be to include even something that's not money. So it can't be that you can't ever use tfuah and kelim for an Eved Ivri, a Jewish slave, to buy himself back. So maybe it means it doesn't have a shavapruta. This is by accident what I said before. If it doesn't have enough value in it, well, my area tfuah v'kelim afilu kesef nami. Well, he would have to acquire himself back by something that has worth, whether it's money, whether it's tfuah and kelim. In other words, you can't say tfuah and kelim don't work if they're not worth a pruta. Nothing works if it's not worth a pruta. So it shouldn't have specified specifically tfuah and kelim. Elalav, so concludes Rabbi Yosef, it must be what? De ipuhu shavapruta. It is actually worth a pruta, and yet it doesn't work. Why wouldn't it work? What could be the only reason tfuah and kelim wouldn't work? Kevan de lo kaitze lo. Since they don't have a set value, they can't be evaluated because the price fluctuates a lot. So since they can't be evaluated, that's why they can't be used. So here comes Rabbi Yosef to say, what do you see here? If you're going to betroth the woman, okay, we're going to learn the same thing, the same way we're doing a kinyan for the Eved Ivri, for the Jewish slave, we're going to be doing this kinyan for this woman, and it can only work if it's a shavapruta that has a value, that it has a set amount. It can be evaluated at a set amount. To which the Gemara now says, V'idach, now what's Rabba going to say to this? What's his retort to this explanation? What's he going to say? Because Rabba disagrees with Rabbi Yosef and says it doesn't need kaitse. So how is he going to understand this braita? What we've done right now, is explain the only way to really understand this braita. Tfuah and kelim, it can't be, you can't ever acquire in tfuah and kelim. Well, it can't be, you can't ever acquire if it has less than a shavapruta, because that would be just tfuah and kelim. That would be anything. It must be tfuah and kelim when they have a shavapruta are unique in the sense that they can't be used. Why can't they be used? Because de lo kaitse. Because in this, right, you need it to be, it would be a case where the tfuah and kelim couldn't be evaluated. And that proves that if you can't evaluate, or you didn't evaluate, possibly we're saying if they weren't evaluated, that's if you evaluated them, then you could use them. But if you didn't evaluate them, then you couldn't use them. To which we're going to say, Rabba, who thinks that this does work, even de lo kaitse, ida chachi kamar. This is the way you read it. B'torat kesef hu nikneh, ve'ino nikneh b'torat tfuah and kelim. It can be, an Eved Ivri can acquire himself in the way that money is acquired, but, or as a way, right, with like a kinyan kesef, but not with a type of kinyan that's used generally for tfuah and kelim. What would that be? Maininhu chalipin. Now we're going to assume, okay, there's an assumption the Gemara makes, which is that tfuah and kelim, what makes them unique out of anything else? What did we say? If it's, right, why tfuah and kelim and not anything else? Well, what makes them unique? Tfuah and kelim are acquired not with a kinyan of money, but with a kinyan of chalipin, a symbolic act of, right, a handkerchief is lifted, something is passed to someone else just as a symbolic act to show that this was being acquired. So what do you see here? What it's telling you is an Eved Ivri can acquire himself with a kinyan kesef, and the way kesef is generally acquired, but can't be acquired, can't buy himself back from a Gentile owner through a kinyan of chalipin. So when it said tfuah and kelim, it doesn't mean actually tfuah and kelim. What it means is the way that tfuah and kelim are generally acquired. So now they say, but wait a minute. This explanation of Rabbah, who's bringing this retort to Rav Yosef, only works according to those who think that tfuah and kelim and perah, right, and kelim can be acquired with chalipin. But Rav Nachman the Amar perah lo avde chalipin. Rav Nachman says you can't do perah with chalipin. Okay, there is no such, right? Rav Nachman says perah lo avde chalipin. You can't acquire produce. Okay, perot and tfuah are used interchangeably, right? Tfuah could be grains, but it's also produce. Produce can't be acquired with chalipin, which means that you can't say that tfuah and kelim are representative, according to Rav Nachman, with chalipin, because perot, which is half of them, the tfuah, can't be acquired through chalipin. So, how's Rabbah going to explain this braita according to Rav Nachman? Now, some say elsewhere, which is that Rabbah actually seems to hold like Rav Nachman because we paskin like Rav Nachman on this issue. So therefore, it would be hard-pressed to say that he just doesn't hold like Rav Nachman, because that would be a very simple explanation. So now we have to explain Rabbah in a different way. How can he explain this braita? We're going to go back to what we suggested earlier, which we rejected. We said it can't be that they're not worth a pruta, because then it would be tfuah and kelim. It would be anything. To which they say, no, let's go and explain. It doesn't have a shavar pruta, udeka amalta, and the fact that you questioned my iriya tfuah v'kelim afilu kesef namilo, and since you said why tfuah and kelim, even money, well, lo mebaya kama. What it means to say is like this. It's a lo mebaya structure, which is you don't even need to say this, but even this, meaning what? Lo mebaya kesef di'ipe shavar pruta in ilo lo, aval, not only money, which has to have a shavar pruta. If it's not worth a pruta, of course you can't use it. But also tfuah and kelim. Aval tfuah v'kelim. Now, why do you need us to say even tfuah and kelim can't be used even if they're not worth a pruta? Wouldn't that be obvious? Well, not really, because you might have said midmekar v'hanatayu gamar umakne nafshe kamash malat. You might have said, wait a minute. If I received tfuah or kelim, and let's say they're not worth a pruta, but what do I do with them? I eat them. Now that's worth something to me because I get to eat them. That already is benefit for me. Maybe if I'm getting married and betrothed to my husband, and he gives me something that I can eat right away, I get benefit from it. So what if it's not worth a pruta? Money that's not worth a pruta is kind of like nothing, right? Give me a few pennies, come on. But if you give me something I can actually eat and enjoy, maybe that's worth something. And maybe with that benefit, maybe I'm willing to acquire myself. So that's how he's going to explain the braita with the Eved Ivri. Maybe if it's tfuah and kelim, maybe it's worth it to whoever's right, who's buying him freedom from. So the answer is kamash malan. That's why the braita need to teach you no, tfuah and kelim also need to be right. Also need to be worth a pruta. So money needs to be worth a pruta, and the kesef and kelim, and it's a lo mebaya structure, which is you don't right. We need both. Okay, you need to. It's not only this. It's not that this is different than that. They're both the same, but not only do we need to tell you it here, we also need to tell you it there. So I'm Rav Yosef. That was the first proof. So again, what happened here? Rav Yosef brought a proof from this Eved Ivri and the tfuah and the kelim, where we ended up explaining that the tfuah and the kelim must be that they are worth a pruta, because otherwise, why are you telling us this? Which we just explained why we are telling you this. Okay, but again, we're in Rav Yosef first. And he says, it must be de lo kaitze. It must be they didn't evaluate it. And since it wasn't evaluated, that's why it's an issue. Now we're going to have a second proof of Rav Yosef. And then we try to understand how does Rabbah explain it. We rejected the first explanation because of Rav Papa, because of Rav Nachman, which is this issue that maybe it's like tfuah and kelim are acquired, chalipin generally, but then we showed, according to Rav Nachman, perot are not generally acquired with chalipin, perot synonymous with tfuah, and then we brought this second explanation. Now we're going to have another proof of Rav Yosef for his opinion. I'm Rav Yosef. Where do I get this from? Ditanya. Here's a braita. Egel ze lepidyon b'ni, talit ze lepidyon b'ni, lo amar klum. If I say I'm giving you this egel, this calf, for pidyon haben, to redeem my son, or this talit for pidyon haben, to redeem my firstborn son, lo amar klum. Now you're supposed to give 5 slayim. So if I say I'm giving an egel, I'm giving a talit without saying any sort of evaluation of what it's worth, nothing. Egel ze b'chamesh slaim lepidyon b'ni, talit zo b'chamesh slaim lepidyon b'ni b'no padoy. So if I say this calf, which is for the 5 slaim that I owe you, it's worth 5, or this talit, which is 5 slaim I'm giving you, it actually works. So comes Rabbi Yosef and says, after he quotes this braita, Hai pidyon hechidami. What exactly happened here? Ilema, now, what did he say here? Egel said, this egel will be, I actually said it a little bit wrong. It will be for my 5 slaim. Okay, now we don't know how much the egel is worth. We say the egel is in place of the 5 slaim, or the talit is in place of the 5 slaim. So now, right, 5 slaim, that's the sela, is a coin, right? That's the 5 coins that you're supposed to give to the coin. So hechidami, ilema de lo shave. If they're not worth 5 slaim, kol kamine, obviously this isn't going to work. Elalav, it must be afagav de shave, kevin de lo kaitse lo. Right, that they must be worth 5 slaim, but since they weren't evaluated for their worth, it doesn't work. So again, what do you see here? You need evaluation. Comes the Gemara and says, what do you mean? Le'olam de lo shavi. You could say they're not worth anything. And they're not worth the 5. Why would it work anyway? If they're not worth 5 slaim, don't you have to give 5 slaim? Well, kigon de kabil koheni lave. Maybe the Kohen said, I'm willing to accept this. When I said I'm giving you this egel for my 5 slaim, let's say it's worth 4. You're the Kohen. You say, you know what? I'm willing to accept it. Okay, and maybe that would work because the Kohen is saying it's worth it to me like 5. What is the worth of money? The worth of money is the worth of an item, how much it's worth to me. It could be very subjective. Here they're going to bring a proof. Ki had Rav Kahana, shakel sudra mi be pidyon ben. He took a head covering. This is a type of hat or head covering, like a kippah almost, possibly, from the house of a pidyon ben. Okay, meaning he was a Kohen. Now, Tosfot raises a whole problem. He wasn't a Kohen. We see from somewhere else he wasn't a Kohen. So they say 2 interesting answers Tosfot gives in Rav Kahana Shakel Sudra. He says, and in the middle of that Tosfot, Yesh Lomar, Ditrei Rav Kahana Havu. There's 2 Rav Kahanas. One was a Kohen, one wasn't. First of all, his name is Kahana, which is interesting, right? You would think he's a Kohen. But there's some other sugya that shows Rav Kahana wasn't a Kohen. So he says it could be that. Or, here's the more interesting answer. Yesh Lomar, de b'shvil ishto haya lokach. His wife was the daughter of a Kohen. I always love this sugya because I'm a Bat Kohen who married a Yisrael, lost my Kohen status. But according to Tosfot's suggestion here, the daughter of a Kohen is allowed to accept the money for Pidyon Ben, and he accepted it on his wife's behalf, which is a fascinating opinion. We don't hold this way. I've never seen anybody do this, but Tosfot does suggest this as a possibility. Anyway, getting back to Rav Kahana, there's a bunch of interesting things about this. It says that he took this head covering from the Beit Pidyon Ben, which was worth less than 5 slaim. For me, it's worth 5 slaim. And I'm Rav Ashi. Rashi says, by the way, just so you should know, right, the fact that you said this head covering is worth 5 slaim to me, it's only because Lo Amaran Ele Kigon Rav Kahana, the Gavar Rabba, who was only because he was an important person. Sudra Aresh. Very fascinating line here. He needed a head covering on his head, and because of that, it was worth a lot to him, right? So, but a less important person wouldn't necessarily need it. So first of all, there's all sorts of sources in the Gemara about men covering their hair, right? We learned in Ketubot about women covering their hair, men covering their hair. We're going to get to a bunch of those sources, and a whole bunch of them come up in Kiddushin. One on today's daf about Rav Kahana was an important person. Important people apparently cover their hair, which sounds like other men didn't cover their hair. However, we're going to get to Sugiyot on Daf Kaftet and on Daf Lamed Aleph. Both of them, right, they actually relate to different elements of this. And some of the sources, one of them later on in the Masechet and in other places, talk about the importance of realizing that God is above you, right? Having this on your head is a reminder of Yirat Shamayim, of having fear of God in you. And there's 2 different sources that talk about it, which, question how widespread it was at the time. Was everyone covering their hair? Were only important people covering their hair? So there are sugyot that show this way and sugyot that show that way. This source seems to say it was really only important, prominent people. Anyway, he continues to say, but to other people, this wouldn't be worth it. So only if it was an important Kohen would this head covering be able to be worth 5 slain to them, whereas to other people, it wouldn't really be worth that much. Right, which again teaches you the value of objects are different depending on who it is. He had Rav Ashi, Zavan Sudra Mi'ime, another story about the Mar, the son of Rav Ashi, who bought a Sudar Mi'ime, de Rabba. He bought a head covering for his head from the mother of Rabba Mikubi, Shave Asara B'Tzleisar. It was worth 10, and he bought it for 13. Why? Because obviously it was important to him. So what have we seen in the sugya? We had two different proofs of Rav Yosef for the shita that we saw of his at the end of yesterday's daf, which is that if you have an item and you want to use it for a sale, right, for whether it's Kiddushin to acquire the wife, whether it's the Eved Ivri buying out his freedom, whether it's Pidyon Haben, whatever it might be, all the same, you need, according to Rav Yosef is trying to prove, it needs to be evaluated. In each of these brightot he brought, he shows, oh, it's because it wasn't evaluated, that's why it didn't work. And then we have Rabba's retort in both cases, how he explains the source in a different way. Amar Rabbi Elazar, Hitkadshi li b'mana v'natan dinar. We now have a man who says, I want to be betrothed to me with 100 dinarim, v'natan dinar, and then he gives her one of them. Harei zo mekudeshet v'yashlim. She's immediately betrothed. Okay, we're switching topics here. He says, I want to betroth you with 100. He gives her one. And then we say she's immediately betrothed. V'yashlim, and then he has to fill in, meaning he has to finish giving her the 100. If he doesn't give her the 100, then she's actually retroactively not betrothed. But at that moment, as soon as he starts giving her one, she's already immediately betrothed. It's just like a Kiddushin on condition. He betrothed her, and if he fills the commitment of the 100, then she'll be betrothed. If, in other words, she is betrothed now on the condition that he finishes. If he doesn't finish, let's say a year later, again, at what point, but certain point, if he doesn't give her the money, and it's clear he's not giving her the money, they're not betrothed anymore. So she's really mekudesha v'yashli. My time, what's the reason? Because came into Amar la mana, v'yav la dinar, command Amar la almanah. Gemara says exactly what I just said, which is, since he gave her a dinar, and he had said a maneh, which is only 1 out of 90, right, 1 out of 100 of what he owed her, it was as if he said almanah, under the condition that I will do it. And we learned already before, which we're going to see right now, Amarav Huna Amarav, Kol Omer Almanat, to Omer Me'achshav Dami. Anyone who says Almanat is as if he says, from now, under the condition that I fulfill. This we saw a lot in Gitin. Meitive. But question from a bright. Hitkadshili b'maneh, v'haya moneh v'holech, v'ratza echad mehem lachzor. If someone says, Hitkadshili b'maneh, and then he continues, and he starts giving her the money, counts 1, 2, 3, 4, and then one, before he finishes getting to 100, one of them decides to change their mind. Either the husband or the wife says, you know what? I don't really want to go ahead with this. Even if he hasn't given her the last one, he's about to give her the last one, either one can change their mind. It's not a done deal. What do you see here? You give him one, it's not done. In the previous case, we just said, you give one, it's done. It's just a matter of he needs to continue. But here, unless till he gives the last one, it's not actually done, and anyone can change their mind. So the answer, wait, the cases are a little different. It must be where he said with this maneh, and he had the 100 in his hand, and that's why it was different, as opposed to just saying maneh stam, 100, and then gives her a dinar, and then it's clear he'll pay her the money later. But here he must have said with this maneh, and then since he didn't give her this maneh because he hadn't finished yet, it wasn't yet a done deal. To which the Gemara says that's hard to explain that brighter that way because Hami deseifa b'manazo, reisha b'manestam. But the continuation of that brighter starts to talk about a case of manazo, which means that the first part that we just read must not be manazo, it must be just maneh. Because if he had said this maneh, then why would you have to say, if the next case is this maneh, it must be this case, wasn't this maneh, otherwise it would have said so. De katane seifa, let's see the end, and then we'll try to explain how we can explain this. Katani Seifa, Amar lehit kadshili b'manazo, v'nimtza maneh chaser dinar. If he said, I want to betroth you with this 100, and it turns out it was missing a dinar, it was only 99. Oh, dinar shel nechoshet, or one of them was a dinar of copper, a copper dinar and not a silver dinar. Ain't a mekudeshet. Then she's not mekudeshet because it wasn't 100 in the pile that he said. Dinar ra, but if it was a bad dinar, like sometimes you have coins that are ruined, we'll talk about exactly what a dinar ra is. Harezo mekudeshet, it works. V'yachlif, and he just has to switch that one dinar. But if it was missing, or one was copper instead of silver, it would be a problem. So what do you see here? Because the second part was manezo, it must be the first part. Was it manezo, which means it was just regular maneh, and then we don't really have a good answer to our contradiction. To which the Gemara says, no, you can really understand it. Reisha b'seifa da'amar b'manezo, u'perushe kamafarish. The second part is really manezo, and so is the first part. And the second part is just explaining the first part. Ratzach hamehem lachzol, afilu b'dinar ha'acharon ha'reshut biyado. Ketzad, how would that work? Kigon da'amar la b'manezo. How would that work? In a case they could change their mind if he had said with this dinar and it was all in front of him, and then until he gives the whole thing, she's not going to be betrothed. But that's not the same as just saying maneh regular. And we can further prove this. It actually makes a lot more sense, because if in the Reisha was a maneh stam, it wouldn't make any sense to then say maneh zo. If in maneh stam it doesn't work, why would you have to give a case of this maneh? If in a regular maneh it wouldn't work, obviously maneh zo. So therefore, it seems even more proof that the second part is just coming to explain the first, and really both of them are talking about maneh zo, which explains the contradiction between that and our source. Since he said this maneh, that's why she isn't betrothed until he finishes it all, as opposed to the guy who just said maneh and started giving her money, and she's betrothed immediately. To which the Gemara says, well, you tried to prove it from that, but that's not really a good proof, even though they're still accepting the answer. But they're saying the fact that you said hachinami mistaber, this really seems to be clear that the second part is coming to explain the first. Not convinced. Why not? Imishum halo iria, that's not really a good proof. Tana seifa legaluye reisha. You could say that the seifa was coming, it wasn't unnecessary, it really was necessary, because it was coming to explain the first part, meaning what? Shelo tomar reisha b'manazeo aval b'manastam havu kiddushin. Tana seifa b'manazeo michlal dereisha b'manastam. We've had cases like this before, where it must have said, it gives two different ones. We just said before, once you have manestam, obviously manezo isn't going to work if manestam doesn't work. But they say, no, it's to tell you, since there's two, don't think when we just said maneh, we might have meant manezo. The fact that we have maneh and the manezo means that one's manestam, that one's manezo. Neither one actually works. And therefore, you can't necessarily prove that that's the way the Braita reads. So we reject the suggestion that it's, or the Gemara's attempt to say for sure this is the way to read it. Well, it's not for sure, but anyway, afilu hachi, right? And that's because afilu hachi lo havi kiddushin. Even then, it's not going to be kiddushin. But we're still left with our answer. It's just that we can't 100% prove that that's what the Braita was talking about. Okay, now the Gemara goes on and says, Rav Ashi Amar, moneh v'holech shani. He gives a different resolution to this contradiction. So our first resolution is, if you just say maneh versus if you said this maneh, you're not married until it's totally finished. Rav Ashi says, moneh v'holech shani. If you continually, you're sitting there counting out the money is different. Tidata kule, because you were talking about the whole thing, right? And she intended to get the entire thing because you were sitting there with the pile in front of you. That's totally different. Now we're going to go into that bright. What's the case of a dinar, a copper dinar? If she knew there was a copper dinar within that hasavra v'kabla, she must have accepted it anyway. She saw the pile, she saw the copper coin there. So, and then she said, yes, I'm willing to accept the betrothal anyway, so it should work. To which they answer, either he gave it to her at night and she didn't notice there was a copper coin in there, mixed in, like you could assume. It was there mixed up under all the zuzim. She didn't see there were 100 of them. How was she supposed to notice that one was copper? And because of that, it doesn't work, because that's not what she accepted. What's a dinar ra? If it can't be used in the shuk, can't be used at all because it's ruined, well, that's just the same as the copper one, and obviously it's no good. So Amarat Papa, it must be a case where it's not fully usable. What does that mean? So I'll give you an example that just happened to my daughter. She was traveling in the Caucasus area, and she had dollars she brought with her to change, and some of them were crumpled. They were old dollars, and they wouldn't accept them to change because they said, they were nervous that maybe it was not really good money. So now those dollars, if you went to a normal place, you wanted to use them in America, they'd be totally accepted. But in the Caucasus, they wouldn't accept it because they were crumpled up. So that's what it means, dinara. And that's why it actually works, because it could be used in certain places, just not everybody will accept it. Amar Rabba Amar Rav Nachman. Amar la hitkadshi li b'maneh, v'iniach la mashkon aleha, ena mekudesh. He says, be betrothed to me with 100. And then he gives her a mashkon, a collateral. Okay, he says, listen, I'm not going to pay you the money now, but here, take my watch, and eventually I'll pay you the money. That does not work. Turning now to Amud Bet. Mana enkan, mashkon enkan. He didn't give her money, and he didn't give her the collateral because she doesn't own it. We learned already, the Kiddushin has to be something that's given to her own. She's not going to own this collateral, this watch of his, so therefore it doesn't work. But Rava comes and questions Rav Nachman on this and says, wait a minute. It says, if you betroth a woman with collateral, she's betrothed. To which the Gemara says, oh, that's something else. That's not the same collateral here. That doesn't mean if you give her collateral in place of the money. Hatam b'mashkon da'acheri. What that means is, let's say he had someone who borrowed money from him, who gave him a watch as collateral. He gives that watch to the woman. Now you might be saying, it's not even his to give. Well, that statement about Kitcha b'mashkon mekudeshet is actually according to Rabbi Yitzchak. It's Rabbi Yitzchak says, Ta'amar Rabbi Yitzchak, he had a unique opinion about mashkon, and he said the following. We've seen this a bunch of times in Shas already. We'll see it more times. If I take collateral for you from a loan, I own it. How do we know this? Because the pasuk says, I'm supposed to return the collateral to you every night. If I take your blanket, after returning to you at night, so you have something to sleep with. That's what the Torah tells you. And it says in that pasuk, ulecha tiyeh tzedakah. And for you, meaning for the one who lent the money and returns this collateral every night, it will be tzedakah. It will be a good thing that you're doing. To which the Gemara says, if let's say you lent me money and you take my blanket and you give it back to me every night. Now, if it's mine, then you're not doing anything tzedakah, right? Tzedakah means it's a righteous deed. What are you doing that's righteous? It's mine. So what does he say? Why does it say l'chati tzedakah? From here you learn that you actually acquire that item. It's yours. So therefore, if he takes the collateral that he got from somebody else and gives it to her and says, with this watch, you're betrothed. Now what's going to happen? It's actually hers right now. What will happen when I go to return the money, right? When the person who borrowed the money returns the money and she gives back the watch, she'll give back the watch, she'll get the money. So either which way she gets something, right? First she gets the mashkon, which according to Rabbi Yitzchak, she actually owns at that point. At some point she'll have to return it, but she owns it temporarily. So that actually will work. But if he gives her collateral for the money he's supposed to give her and says, listen, until I pay you, I'll give you this watch, that doesn't work. And that's how we reconcile the contradiction between the two sources. B'nei Rav Huna bar Avin, Zavinahu Amta beprite. The sons of Huna bar Avin, of Rav Huna bar Avin, bought an Ama, a slave woman, for prite, for pritot, okay, for coins. Lo hava biyadai, but they didn't have money. So what did they do? Otive naska ale. They gave a bar of silver. Lisov iyakir amta. Now what happened? They gave a bar of silver in the meantime, and when they get the money, they'll give the money and get the bar of silver back. Well, in the end, the price of the Ama went up. So Atu, the Kamed Rabbi Ami, they went to Rabbi Ami, and the guy who sold it said, listen, they never gave me the money. I want to raise the price. To which Rabbi Ami said, Amar lehu, Prite enkan, naske enkan. No money was given, and no bar of silver was given, because it wasn't really given, because it was just a collateral. And therefore, just like with the money, it doesn't work for Kiddushin, it doesn't work here as a sale. There was no kinyan actually. And they can basically renege and they can say, listen, I didn't want to sell you. The owner of the slave woman can say, I don't want to sell her to you because she's now worth more unless you give me more money. Amar Tanu Rabbanan. So what we've done so far on today's daf, let's just review. We have the Machloket Rabbi Yosef. Yesterday we saw the two different explanations. Then going with the second explanation, Rabbi Yosef brought two proofs and Rabba showed us how he disagrees with it. Then we went into them. From that, we got into all sorts of interesting things, betrothing with rings, without stones. We talked about the head covering for men, and people valuing something at different than its actual value. Then we got into these different cases of Mana, if it's 100 and then he only gives her one out of the 100, she's betrothed immediately. How is that different from the guy who's sitting there with a pile of money and starts giving out the money? And we talked about what if there's a copper one mixed in, what if there's a bad one mixed in, right? In different cases like that. Then we talked about him betrothing her with collateral. We reconciled that with a source that seemed to contradict, right? We say it doesn't work for him to say, I'm giving you collateral and eventually I'll give you the money and I'll take back my item. That doesn't work. Okay, now we're moving on. Tanu Rabbanit. Hitkatshili b'maneh. He says, be betrothed to me with 100. Ve'nitalto uzerakto layam. She takes it and throws it immediately into the water. Ola or into a fire. Ola chodavar ha'aved, or something which totally destroys it. Eina mekudeshet. She's not mekudeshet. Now, this is a great question. What did she mean when she took it and threw it into the water, right? What she basically meant was, I am so uninterested in this proposal, right? And then it shows if she's not interested, we already know it's not going to be marriage. So, period. Now the Gemara says, well, what can you infer from here? If he gives her the money and she throws it into the water or a place which totally destroys it, obviously she didn't mean to accept this proposal. But but if she just threw it at him, didn't really accept it, but threw it at him, it sounds like Havu Kiddushin, because only if she threw it to a place where it was totally going to be wiped out, destroyed, it wouldn't be good. So they say now, but how? Isn't she saying, though, I don't want it? If she throws it right back at him, isn't she saying, I'm not interested in this? So to which the Gemara answers, Lo mebaya ka amar, lo mebaya. What it means is, no, it's a lo mebaya structure, which we saw before, which is, Lo mebaya shadetinu kameh de lo have kiddushin. Don't think it means one and not the other. No. Both are included. If she throws it at him, of course that's not kiddushin. She's saying, take it back. Okay, that for sure doesn't work. You didn't even need to say that. Aval zirakto layam olaol. But what could you be thinking? Now, this is back to all this kind of sugya where we try to get into the head of a woman who would do this kind of thing. Why would she throw it into the yam, right, into the water? Maybe. Kevan, Ema, you might say, Kevan de Mechayva Buhu, Kiddushe Kaddish Nafshe. Maybe, right now, maybe she really did accept this. Now, then why, if she really accepted it, why would she have thrown it into the water? She wants to see how he's going to react. She wants to check her husband. Okay, what kind of guy am I marrying? Is this a guy who's going to get super angry? Could you imagine the scene? He gives her the money. She throws it into the water immediately. Now, he could get really angry. She wanted to see his reaction and test him. And maybe she really did mean to accept the Kiddushin. Kamash malan, that's why they have to tell you, no. That is not Kiddushin. Don't think that, okay? Don't think that she was just testing him to see if he's an angry guy or not. No, she clearly meant, okay? So obviously if she throws it right back at him, she clearly means not to accept the betrothal. But even if she throws it into the water, don't think that she's doing it just to test him. No, she really is not accepting the proposal. Tanu Rabbanit. We're going to have more cases like this where we have to figure out what was the woman thinking. Hitkatshili b'maneh. T'neim la'abu la'avicha. If he says, I want to betroth you with 100, and she says, listen, I don't want it, give it to my father or give it to your father. Eina mekudesh. She's not betrothed. But she's basically saying again, thank you, but no thank you. Go give it to them. Al-minachi kablum li, go give it to my father or your father, that they'll accept it on my behalf. Well, then obviously mekudeshet, she's betrothed. And another case, Tana Ab. So now they say, Tana Abba lahodyacha koch deresha. Tana Vicha lahodyacha koch desefa. They said her father to show you, even if she says, give it to my father in the beginning, she means, I don't want it. Don't think give it to my father means, oh, on my behalf. And the avicha is, even if she says, give it to your father, for me, that works as well. Second case in that bright. Itkatshili b'maneh, t'nam leploni, ena mekudeshet. If he says, with a maneh, right, be betrothed to me, and she says, give it to somebody else, she's not mekudeshet, because again, she's saying, I don't want this. Al-manachi kablum li, if she says, give it to someone else that they accept on my behalf, mekudeshet, then she is. Now, sricha, why do you need these both? Right? Why? It's the exact same case as the Abba v'Avicha. Those two people are people she's close to, one because it's her father and the other one because it will be her father-in-law. So therefore, you can, if she says, give it to them, they'll accept on my behalf, she must be confident that they will accept it, and therefore, because she knows them and they have interest here, and therefore she really was agreeing. Savra avdin lishlichutai, she figures they'll accept on my behalf. Aval ploni lo, but maybe you would think some stranger or someone else, some third party who's not related, if she says, go give it to them and they'll accept on my behalf, how does she know they'll really accept? Maybe they won't. And therefore, you might have thought it wouldn't work in that case. V'yashmina ploni, now if you just had the case of someone else, a random person, you would say, Hachahu dichi amra tnam leploni lo hava kiddushin. That would be a case where she says, oh, I don't want it, go give it to someone else, where it wouldn't work. Because she has nothing to do with him. It's not like she wants to say, give it, right? Instead of giving it to me, give it to them, and I'll be betrothed through that. Because why would she want to give them a gift? But her father or future father-in-law, where she has a relationship with them, maybe that was what she meant. Maybe she's saying, oh, you're giving me money, you know what, give it to them, meaning I want to accept it, but I'm now passing it on to them as a gift. Maybe then she would be betrothed. So, tzricha, that's why you needed both cases to say neither one is going to work. Okay, Tana Rabbanan. Now we're going on to another braita. Hitkachili b'maneh, tnam al gabe sela. Again, we're trying to figure out what does she mean. She said, put it on this rock. And a mekudeshet, because again, she's saying, I don't want it, put it on the rock. V'im haya sela shela, if it was her rock, well then mekudeshet, because she's saying, put it in my property. By Rabibi, sela shel shnehem mahu. What if the rock is jointly owned by both of them? Teku, we don't know the answer. It's tough to know what she means. Hitkachili b'kikar. This is a funny one. He says, be betrothed to me with this loaf of bread. Tenehu lekelev, and she says, give it to the dog. And because again, she's saying, give it to a dog. I don't want it. But if it was her dog, mikudeshet, because again, she said, oh, give it to my dog. I want my dog to benefit. That's benefiting her because the dog belongs to her. By Rav Mary, but Rav Mary says, what if kelev ratz achareha? There was a dog chasing her. Mau. And then he says, betroth me with this loaf. And she says, this dog chasing me. Go give it to the dog. Well, she's benefiting because then the dog will eat the bread and she'll stop chasing her. So do you say, maybe right, the benefit she gets, so she's willing to betroth herself to him. Oh, Dilma, or perhaps you could say, this is funny, what she says is throw it to the dog because you have a Torah obligation to help save me. My life is in danger right now. So throw this bread to the dog. Don't start betrothing me right now, right? You can imagine the scene. He's trying to give it right. In general, these are kind of funny situations where the woman throws it right back at him. Right? He's trying to betroth her and she says, there's a dog chasing me. Go save my life. That's much more important right now. Don't start betrothing me. So take it. We don't really know. This is going to be similar, but a little bit different, not a life-saving situation. But take this loaf, and she says, give it to this poor person. So, she's not mekudeshet. Even if it was an ani who was a poor person who relied on her. My time. Now, why doesn't this work? Even if it's an ani, if it's a poor person who usually comes to her, then it's benefiting her because she's giving the money to the poor person. But no, it's not like she's accepting it and then giving it. No, she's saying, don't betroth me with the money. Go give it to a poor person. Right? I don't want your money. Why would we assume that? She doesn't mean, well, I'm going to feed this poor person because same like the previous, just like I'm obligated to feed this poor person. And I say, I feed him all the time, but it's your turn to feed this person. Take your money, go feed this person. Don't betroth me with this money. Okay. So we're going to stop here and we'll see a case, another case coming up. So what we saw at the end of this stop was all sorts of situations where the husband says, betroth me in this way. She has a reaction and we have to assess what do we think she meant by this reaction. And we get into very interesting situations, right, where we have to try to get into her mind and think, what was she actually thinking when she said the following things? That's it for today's daf. Wishing everybody a great day.